All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always up for a good deep dive.
Today, we're going deep into finance.
Oh, finance. Exciting.
Well, it's finance, but with a bit of a twist.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the twist?
We're looking at this concept of financial colonialism.
Financial colonialism. That's a new one.
It's a term coined by an economist, Jaime Hoerricks.
Okay.
And our source material is an excerpt from The Outside,
Okay.
specifically episode 132.
Right.
It's called The Art of the Steal.
The Art of the Steal sounds a little ominous.
Yeah, it's a very provocative piece, I have to say.
I bet. So what's the central question here?
Well, Hoerricks asks this: is capitalism inherently extractive, and are retail investors the new colonized class?
Whoa, that's a pretty bold statement to start with.
It is.
Yeah. It suggests that it's not just about, normal market fluctuations, but something much more systemic.
Exactly. He argues that modern capitalism has evolved from exploiting physical resources.
Right, like we saw in historical colonialism.
Exactly.
Taking over land, extracting resources.
To exploiting financial ones today.
So instead of physical land, it's the financial markets that are being colonized.
That's the argument.
Interesting. And he sees a direct parallel between the two.
He does.
Both involve extracting wealth.
From a group.
Often those with less power, less knowledge.
And using it to benefit.
A select, powerful elite.
Okay, so before we get too deep into the theory here,
Let's ground this a little bit.
I think a good example
Okay.
is the NVIDIA stock crash.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people were talking about that one.
It was all over the news. Remember all that hype around AI?
Oh, yeah. It was crazy.
Drove NVIDIA stock way up.
Sky high.
And
then
boom, crashed out
$1 trillion.
in market value.
Yeah. And you know what Hoerricks points out? That while a lot of retail investors were left holding the bag, wondering what the heck just happened, the ones with the insider information, the ones who actually benefit from this extraction, they conveniently cashed out before the crash.
So it's like this illusion of opportunity.
Exactly. Retail investors get drawn in.
By the promise of high returns.
Yeah.
But they often lack the information or the tools to really navigate these complex systems.
We're playing a game they don't fully understand the rules of.
So is he saying it's not just bad luck?
No.
Or poor choices by these investors?
He's suggesting there's something much more systemic at play here.
That the system itself is set up to benefit a select few.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, he lays out what he calls the terrible 10.
The terrible 10?
10 modern examples of what he considers to be financial scams.
Okay, we probably don't have time to go through all 10.
No, that would be a whole other deep dive.
But can we highlight a few of the most compelling ones?
Absolutely. One that really stands out is the rise and fall of WeWork. Oh, yeah, WeWork. They were everywhere for a while.
Right, and then poof, implosion.
But didn't the founder, Adam Neumann, still walk away with a fortune?
He did.
Yeah.
$1.7 billion, despite the company's failure.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
Meanwhile, you had countless employees who had bought into the vision.
Yeah.
They were left with worthless stock options.
So there's this disconnect between who takes the risk and who reaps the reward.
A huge disconnect. It's not a level playing field at all.
So the average investor is at a disadvantage from the start.
That's what Hoerricks is arguing, and he has some pretty compelling examples to back it up.
And are there other examples that kind of drive this point home?
Oh, absolutely. He uses the Trump meme coin as another example.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting one.
Right. The irony is pretty thick there.
Yeah.
Trump, often portrayed as this anti-establishment figure.
Yeah, the outsider.
Right. Allegedly made billions.
From this coin.
While many of his supporters who bought into the hype, they ended up with, well,
a worthless asset. So it raises some interesting questions, right?
About who's really benefiting from these seemingly populist movements.
Exactly. Is there a deliberate manipulation of certain demographics for financial gain?
Okay, so we've got these high-profile examples.
Yeah.
But, I think a lot of our listeners are probably thinking, well, I'm not buying meme coins.
Right.
I'm not investing in billion-dollar startups.
Yeah, so how does this financial colonialism apply to me?
Exactly.
That's where Hoerricks' concept of what he calls the mechanics of extraction comes in.
Okay, break that down for us.
So he argues that venture capital, hype cycles, and the illusion of opportunity are used to draw in everyday retail investors, ultimately leading to their financial exploitation.
So how does that work, like in a practical sense?
Think of it this way.
Yeah.
Venture capitalists, often with insider information,
Right.
invest early in a company.
Right.
Then, through media hype,
Yeah.
influencer marketing.
They create a buzz around it
Okay.
that inflates the company's value.
Gotcha.
This attracts retail investors.
Thinking they're getting in early.
Exactly.
On the ground floor.
But then, when the hype dies down or the company doesn't meet expectations, the bubble bursts.
Right.
Retail investors are left holding the bag.
So is he saying that the game is rigged?
That's a key takeaway here.
Yeah.
It's not about individual choices.
Moves and market fluctuations.
It's about a systemic pattern of drawing in capital, creating this inflated value, and then extracting wealth.
Leaving the average investor.
Holding the bag, yeah.
And he compares this to...
historical colonialism.
Using terms like...
settlers and strip mining.
To describe how these new...
territories for wealth extraction.
Created.
In the financial markets.
Wow. Okay, that is a lot to process.
It's a pretty bleak picture he's painting.
It feels like we're all playing a game we don't fully understand.
And the rules are constantly changing against us. Exactly.
And what's even more concerning is that Hoerricks believes what we've seen so far is just the beginning.
No, there's more.
He thinks we're on the cusp of an even larger and more dangerous phase of financial colonialism.
Which is?
The privatization of public goods.
Privatization? How does that fit into this?
Well, he argues that this next phase targets things that used to be considered public goods.
Like?
Healthcare, education, utilities.
Essential services.
Exactly. Even Social Security.
Wow.
These services become commodities, subject to market forces and profit motives.
So who benefits from this shift?
Often, it's the same financial players.
The ones we've been talking about.
Who have been profiting from the systems we've been discussing.
So it's not just some abstract economic theory.
No.
This is about things that directly impact our lives.
The services we rely on every day.
That's when it gets really unsettling.
Absolutely. We go from being citizens with rights and access to essential services.
To be
consumers in a system where profits often take priority over people's needs.
And that's where Hoerricks' analysis gets really interesting and potentially controversial.
It definitely challenges a lot of assumptions about how our economy works.
So let's unpack that then. What specifically does he see happening, and what are the implications? So we've got these essential services, things that were meant to be accessible to everyone, being transformed into these
profit-driven markets.
Yeah, what are the real-world consequences of that shift?
Well, for starters, costs often go up.
Makes sense if the goal is to make a profit.
Right. Think about healthcare in the U.S., for example.
Good example.
It's a profit-driven system.
Yeah.
We see much higher costs compared to countries with universal healthcare.
It's not just about the price tag, though, is it?
No, absolutely not.
There's the issue of quality.
And access.
As well.
Exactly. When profit becomes the primary motivator, there's a risk that corners get cut.
Right.
Services are reduced.
And the people who can't afford to pay.
They're left behind.
So essentially, it exacerbates existing inequalities.
It widens the gap
between the haves
and the have-nots.
And this ties back into
his argument about financial colonialism.
Right. It's not just about individual companies
or investors.
It's about a system
that increasingly concentrates wealth and power
in the hands of
select few
at the expense of
a majority.
And what role does the media play in all of this?
Oh, that's a big one.
We touched on it earlier.
Yeah.
But Hoerricks seems of how the media portrays these issues.
He argues that corporate media, with its ties to big business and the financial industry, often downplays the negative impacts of these trends.
So they might present privatization as
efficiency
or streamlining.
Right, glossing over the potential downsides for everyday people.
It's like they're presenting a
sanitized version of reality.
One that
benefits the status quo.
And they might also demonize
or marginalize
voices that
challenge these systems.
So people who critique financial extraction
or privatization
might be labeled as
radical or anti-business,
discrediting their views. So it becomes a battle over the narrative, controlling how these issues are framed.
And discussed in the public sphere.
Hoerricks is urging us to be
critical consumers
of media, to question the sources of information.
Seek out diverse perspectives.
And be wary of narratives that seem to benefit those already in power. So it's about becoming more
media literate,
more discerning about what we hear
it's essential.
In today's world.
With information overload everywhere.
So we've talked about the problems.
Yeah.
the mechanics of extraction,
the dangers of privatization,
the media's role. It's a lot to take in. It can feel overwhelming.
It can.
So where do we go from here?
That's the big question, isn't it?
What can we do to push back against these trends?
Well, Hoerricks doesn't offer a simple solution, a 5-step plan or anything. But he suggests that awareness is the first step.
Okay, understanding how these systems work.
How they impact our lives.
And how they're often perpetuated by those in power.
Right.
So knowledge is the first line of defense.
It is, being able to recognize the patterns.
And name them.
And once we have that awareness, we can start to make more informed choices.
Okay.
We can support businesses and organizations that align with our values.
Advocate for policies that promote economic justice.
Protect public good.
Become more engaged citizens.
Exactly.
Demanding transparency and accountability.
From those in power.
So it's about individual action.
Yes.
But also collective action.
Yeah, absolutely.
Working together to create
a more equitable system.
It's not about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about
taking small steps.
Making conscious choices.
Engaging in dialogue.
That actually feels empowering.
It can be.
It's not about waiting for some grand revolution. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play.
In shaping the world we want to live in.
And that's where this analysis
of the financial colonialism
becomes a call to action.
But it's a challenge.
To question.
The status quo.
To think critically about.
The systems we live in.
Demand something better.
So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm curious to hear your perspective on this. Hoerricks focuses on these larger systemic issues. But is there also a personal responsibility element here?
That's an interesting question.
What can individuals do beyond these collective actions to protect themselves in this landscape?
Well, it's not about blaming individuals for falling victim to these systems.
Of course not.
But there are steps we can take to become more informed and discerning participants in the financial world.
Like what? Give us some practical tips.
Well, financial literacy is key.
Okay, so understanding
how markets work, different types of investments,
the risks and rewards,
the better equipped we are to make sound decisions.
There are tons of resources available.
Online, in libraries.
Yeah, it's about empowering ourselves.
With knowledge.
Not just relying on others to tell us what to do with our money.
It's also important to be wary of
get-rich-quick schemes.
Yeah, those promises of easy money.
If it sounds too good to be true.
It probably is.
Good advice for life in general, I'd say.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And finally, don't be afraid to seek advice.
Okay.
From trusted professionals, financial advisors, accountants, lawyers.
They can help you navigate the complexities.
And protect your interests.
So it's about being proactive.
Doing our research.
Building a support network to help us make those informed decisions.
Financial well-being is an ongoing journey.
It's not a destination.
Requires continuous learning, adaptation.
A healthy dose of skepticism.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's some solid advice.
I hope so.
As we move into the final part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to something Hoerricks mentions. Toward the end of the excerpt, potential alternatives to this extractive model.
This is where it gets really interesting.
It feels like we've been focusing on the problems.
We have.
But are there actually viable solutions out there?
That's the question.
What does a more equitable
and sustainable
economic system look like?
Right.
So are there viable alternatives to this extractive economic model?
Well, Hoerricks doesn't lay out a specific blueprint, but he points to some interesting possibilities.
Like what?
He suggests exploring models that prioritize shared ownership, democratic control of resources, and a focus on sustainability over endless growth.
That sounds pretty radical.
It's definitely a different way of thinking about economics.
Can you give us some concrete examples?
Sure. One example he mentions is the cooperative movement.
Cooperatives, like worker-owned businesses.
Exactly, where employees have a stake in the company's success.
And a say in how it's run.
This model can help distribute wealth more equitably.
So instead of a traditional top-down hierarchy,
it's more collaborative.
Where everyone has a vested interest in the company's well-being.
That's the idea.
He also talks about community-owned enterprises.
Yeah, where resources or services are managed by and for the benefit of local communities.
Like community-owned energy projects.
Exactly, or even community banks that prioritize lending to local businesses and residents.
That makes sense, keeping the economic benefits within the community.
Rather than being extracted by outside forces.
He even mentions universal basic income.
A system where everyone receives a guaranteed minimum income.
Regardless of their employment status.
Right. It could provide a safety net.
And potentially free people up to pursue more creative endeavors.
Without the fear of financial ruin.
These are all interesting ideas, but they seem pretty far outside the mainstream.
They are. They challenge a lot of conventional thinking.
Is Hoerricks just a utopian idealist?
Well, it's true that these models aren't dominant right now.
Yeah.
But there are examples of them working successfully in various parts of the world.
Like where?
From worker cooperatives in Spain to community-owned energy projects in Germany.
So it's not just theoretical.
No, these ideas are being put into practice.
And they're achieving positive outcomes.
Social and economic, yes.
That's encouraging. But how do we get from where we are now?
In a system dominated by financial extraction.
To a more equitable and sustainable model?
That's the million-dollar question.
What are the steps involved?
Well, Hoerricks emphasizes that it's a process.
Okay.
It requires shifting mindsets.
Right. Challenging assumptions.
And building new structures and institutions.
So it's not just about tweaking the existing system.
It's about a much more fundamental shift.
Rethinking our relationship with wealth.
Power and the role of the economy.
It's a pretty profound shift.
It is.
And it's not going to happen overnight.
No. It requires a sustained effort.
Promptly.
Policymakers, businesses, communities, individuals.
All working together.
Towards a common goal.
But it's a journey worth taking. And Hoerricks' analysis provides a roadmap.
Helping us understand the challenges.
And the potential pathways forward.
Right. It's about recognizing that we have choices.
Okay, so as we reach the end of this deep dive, we've explored some complex ideas.
About financial colonialism, the mechanics of extraction, the role of the media.
The search for alternatives.
It's a lot to take in.
What are the key takeaways you hope our listeners will walk away with?
Well, I hope they'll come away with a heightened awareness.
Of how these systems operate.
How they impact their lives.
And how they're perpetuated.
Often in subtle ways.
So awareness is the first step.
Towards empowerment.
And with that awareness comes the ability to make more informed choices.
About where they invest their money, how they consume information.
How they engage in the political process.
Exactly.
So it's about becoming more conscious participants in this system.
Rather than passive bystanders.
It's also about recognizing that we're not alone in this.
There are so many people and organizations working towards a better world.
By connecting with them, supporting them,
amplifying their voices,
we can contribute to positive change.
It's not about feeling overwhelmed.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play.
Hoerricks reminds us that history isn't predetermined.
We have the agency to challenge the status quo.
To envision an alternative.
And to create systems that serve the common good.
Not just the interests of a few.
Well said. So to wrap up this deep dive into financial colonialism.
A complex but crucial topic.
We leave you with this final thought.
Yeah.
If Hoerricks is right, and capitalism is inherently extractive.
What kind of world do we want to create in its place?
What values do we want to prioritize?
And what systems will best embody those values?
Those are questions worth wrestling with.
And we encourage you to continue exploring them.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
We hope you found it informative and empowering.
Remember, the conversation doesn't end here.
Keep those minds curious.
Stay engaged.
And keep pushing for a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive,